They can talk, walk, smile, and even dance. These dolls behave on the screen as if they are alive, but did you know that the ease of their movements is the result of the painstaking work of a whole team of animators? In the entire history of puppet animation, masters have invented all sorts of tricks so that you can see animated dolls on your screens. But let's take it in order. In this video I would like to introduce you to the history of creating puppet animation, and I assure you, it will be very interesting, so do not turn off the video. Also, I will leave all the links to the videos that I will use in my video in the description so that you can watch them in their entirety, if it is interesting. Well, I will be very happy if you like this video and also subscribe to the channel. Now, perhaps, let's start. Puppet animation appeared together with the first feature films, and they are based on the same idea, to create the illusion of movement of objects using fast scrolling of the captured frames. The only difference is that in order to make the illusion of real movement, you need to take a very large number of pictures per second. While stop motion does not require haste. The animator simply removes the object, and then moves it for the next frame, and so frame by frame. If you quickly scroll through such photos, it will seem to you that the object is moving on its own. The technique of stop-motion shooting can be compared with traditional 2D animation, only photographs are used instead of drawings. Stop-motion animation has been going hand in hand with feature films since its inception. It was just that she was practically the only special effect available and appeared in the first films of the Edison Film Studio. You are seeing one of the first pictures right now, I will leave a link to it in the description. The very first fully puppet cartoon, which was called Humpty Dumpty's Circus, was filmed around 1898 by James Stewart Blacktom and Albert Smith. But it is unknown or in fact this cartoon was the earliest example of stop-motion shooting, and the cartoon itself was lost. But A Haunted Hotel published in 1907 year has survived from these authors. This is one of the first feature films in which stop-motion was used as a special effect. However, you may have noticed that it was not dolls that were animated here, but furniture and dishes. In addition to replacing special effects, puppet animation also found another use. Director Vladislav Starovich used puppet animation in his documentary about insects. When he was shooting one of his paintings, the bugs stopped moving in front of the camera due to artificial lighting. The problem was solved by using the stop-motion technique. Instead of real beetles, their shells were removed and the frames were manually reanimated. After that, the occupation of puppet animation fascinated Vladislav, and he became, so to speak, a pioneer of puppet animation and shot many documentaries and entertaining cartoons. By the way, he was one of the first to shoot puppet films with a plot that was often based on famous literary works. Well, accordingly, his paintings were a great success. Also quite a striking figure in puppet animation was Willis O'Brien. This is the director of the legendary film The Lost World, which was released in 1925. Willis also used stop-motion animation to create special effects, and what he did was perfectly proved by the movie King Kong released in 1933, which became one of the most spectacular for its time, and all this thanks to the correct use of stop-motion animation in action scenes. Also, many directors did not hesitate to experiment with stop-motion animation. For example, George Pal invented a technique that simplified the work with dolls and which all animators then used. Instead of doll heads with moving eyes and a mouth, the animator made a doll whose head changed. Each head had separate emotions of the character, and it was much easier to change them than manually adjusting the doll's facial expressions. This seems like an obvious technique, but at one time it made a breakthrough in stop-motion animation, and Pal was awarded an award from the American Film Academy for his invention. And by the way, Pal was one of the first to start shooting commercials using stop-motion animation. In the 30s and 40s, it had its own puppet show, in the creation of which Ray Harryhausen also took part. This is another outstanding animator, whom I mentioned once told how The Corpse of the Bride was filmed. I'll leave a hint in the right corner, if it's interesting, you can take a look. Before working at the studio, Harryhausen created dolls himself and experimented with them in his garage. There he shot his first mini-movie and sent a copy of it to Pal's studio. Well, after which he was immediately hired. Harryhausen was a big fan of Willis O'Brien and worked on paintings with a very large number of special effects made in the technique of stop motion. He never acted as a director, but if someone worked with him, then his opinion was always taken into account and listened to him. Under the direction of Ray, the Sinbad trilogy was filmed. Although he himself was responsible only for the special effects, in fact he greatly influenced the script and direction of the picture. But Harryhausen also developed a special technique for stop-motion animation. It was called dynamic. The essence of this technique was to combine stop-motion animation with regular shooting in one frame. It happened like this. The doll was placed on a table between two panels. On one side there was a background image, on the other there was a black foreground background. A film with real actors was then superimposed on the foreground. The result was a frame with layers, a background, an animated stop-motion scene and game frames in the foreground. But not only in the USA they wanted to shoot projects with a lot of special effects. So in 1954, the Japanese director Ansira Honda released a picture called Godzilla, which launched a whole series of the same films about a giant lizard. Interestingly, the monsters used the technique of vanity making for filming. That is, Godzilla was played by a man in a suit, but the stop motion was applied in other scenes where there were special effects. But in subsequent films about the lizard, the technique of puppet animation was used with might and main. For example, in the picture Godzilla vs. Godzilla Mech, when the monsters fought among themselves, a stop-motion technique was used. By the way, fully puppet cartoons have also been very popular, especially in the USA. In the 50s, the Paula dolls were joined by the Gumby Show. It was the first television series using plasticine animation. The animation of plasticine dolls itself appeared at the beginning of the 20th century, but it was popularly made by the animator Art Clokey, the creator of Gumby. As a result, the show was popular and lasted for more than 10 years. But really puppet animation was popular in Eastern Europe. One of the most influential animators then was Ernst Rinke. He was even often called the Walt Disney of Eastern Europe. He got this nickname for his love of experiments, from the original staging of light to the use of shadow theater. Its distinctive feature was large detailed scenes with a large number of dolls and decorations. In the 60s and 70s, puppet animation was also popular in the USSR. The most striking figure of Soviet animation was director Roman Kachanov, the author of a series of cartoons about Cheburashka. In those years, Soyuzmultfilm tried to create something of its own, not like the works of Disney. And Kachanov's cartoons came just in time. His works were truly unique in everything, starting with the assembly of puppet characters and ending with the technique of their animation. It was thanks to this director that the Soviet school of stop-motion animation was formed. In the 80s, the United States was considered the golden age of stop-motion animation. She was everywhere. In movies, in cartoons, in advertising, and even in music videos. One of these clips for a song by Peter Gabriel won 10 awards on MTV in 1987. Stop-motion commercials have also reached the peak of popularity. Some of the characters from the ads were so popular that they got their own shows. For example, the noise from the Domino Spokes advertisement became a character in the platformer Evo Je Noi for Commander 64 MC-DOS. In addition, there was even a jazz band group consisting of dolls in the form of raisins called California Raisins. They advertised the product under the same name as the note and became popular thanks to their musical accompaniment in commercials. This strange group had 2 albums of their own on behalf of the brand, they appeared in cartoons, and they also had their own video game from Capcom for the NES platform. Be sure to watch the full video from these highlights in the description, it's worth it. By the 80s, the use of such animation was honed so much that the viewer could hardly distinguish it from real shooting. Today, frames, for example, from the same RoboCop look naive and a little ridiculous, but in the 80s such special effects were very realistic. By the early 90s, the public was already fed up with stop-motion animation. Even famous animators such as Harryhausen slowly began to be forgotten. In 1981, the director released the film Battle of the Titans, after which he took a break for 22 years. New technologies began to appear and the need for time-consuming animation began to disappear. The finale of this era was the film Jurassic Park 1993 years. The history of the creation of this picture clearly shows the transition from stop-motion. Initially, it was planned to animate dinosaurs manually. For this, the creators even hired Phil Tripett. He is a stop-motion special effects specialist in many famous films, including Star Wars. For the Jurassic period, he had to do dinosaur animation, but in the go-motion style. This is a puppet animation with the addition of a motion blur effect for smoother movement. But after the start of filming, the authors of the film decided to use the new CJ technology, which gave an incredible result. The dinosaurs on the screen were more alive and moved much more smoothly. The film eventually became a real sensation and forever changed the attitude of the film industry and the public to the quality of special effects. After Pixar released the Toy Story cartoon in 1995, interest in puppet cartoons also began to decline. Arman Studio also shot a plasticine cartoon Escape from the Chicken Coop, and this picture was a success. True, not only stop-motion technology was involved here, but it also made working with dolls much easier and made their movement on the screen smoother. With the loss of popularity of stop-motion, most animation studios switched to a short film format. The same creators of the Chicken Coop Escape mainly shoot commercials, and for many animators they are the main source of income at the moment. And some studios, for example PS, exist only thanks to advertising. By the way, go to the description of the video, be sure to watch their commercials, they look very, very good. With the rapid spread of CJ stop-motion animation became useless to anyone, as it was time-consuming and did not give an ideal result. Next to the smooth movements of the dolls from the CJ effect, the jerky movements of the dolls from the stop-motion looked ridiculous. Based on this, animators who spent years of their lives mastering stop-motion technology realized in an instant that no one needed their talent. But not everyone began to put up with this. For example, Tim Burton treated stop-motion not as an outdated special effect, but as a creative technique. In one of his rather striking works in the movie Beetlejuice, the director animated monsters so that their movements were as ridiculous as possible, as in old horror films. In 1982, Burton shot his first puppet short film called Vincent. The narrator in the cartoon was actor Vincent Price. He read a verse about himself, which Tim wrote. Although in the future Tim was less and less able to use stop-motion technology, he was still able to create at least 2 good cartoons. They were The Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach. But Burton shot his first own puppet cartoon The Corpse of the Bride only in the 2005 year, and 7 years later he created a remake of his cruel motion picture Frankenweenie. But despite his love of puppet animation, Burton still smoothed the movement of the hero with the help of CJ. As a result, the dolls in his cartoons are barely distinguishable from 3 different models. Also worth mentioning is another director who prefers stop-motion technology instead of effects. Wes Anderson was engaged in the creation of the painting The Incomparable Mr. Fox, and it was a kind of experiment for him, because he wanted the audience to see that the picture in front of them was in stop motion and eventually went further than any of his colleagues. He suggested shooting the picture at a frequency of 12 frames instead of the usual 24. As a result, it turned out that the fluffy dolls in the cartoon not only looked like children's toys, but also moved as if they were animated by a child. As a result, Anderson's inexperience in working with stop-motion animation went into his hands, and the film turned out to be fresh and in many ways experimental for modern animation. In the 2016 year, the director returned to stop-motion animation and began working on a second project, which was called The Island of the Dog. In this cartoon you can really see the animator's hand. Each frame of this picture is filled with small details and shot with love. 240 scenes and 1,000 dolls were used for filming. By the way, the dogs in this cartoon were made of plasticine on a metal frame. The main task of the animators who worked on the Island of Dogs was to leave their own handwriting. It's as if the animators' hands will appear on the screen right now and move the dolls. And they did it. Let the cartoon turn out to be not perfect and the characters in it are not smoothed by the CJ effect, but with the help of shooting at 12 frames per second, Anderson managed to convey the effect of the animator's presence. Today, stop-motion animation is an outdated, costly and time-consuming technique that requires a lot of effort, patience and time. And not every director has the desire and opportunity to work with dolls. But in such conditions, puppet animation is in itself bold artistic statements. For Wes Anderson himself and for many other directors, stop-motion is nostalgia for childhood, for the films of Harryhausen and television short films from the Baz Production Studio, which every American child knows. Perhaps my video will inspire some of you and you will try yourself in this difficult body. And who knows, maybe we will watch your short films or cartoons in a few years. Everything can be. In the meantime, we have come to the end, and I hope you have watched the video up to this point. I will be pleased if my work is not wasted time. Therefore, if you liked the video, be sure to like it, and also click on the bell to receive notifications about new videos and watch them first. Good mood to everyone. See you soon.